My name is Chilianas, and I'm the president of Foundation for Economic Education. For the past 75 years, we've been committed to defending the ideas of liberty. Looking around the world, I think you would agree that these ideas are more needed than ever. And young people are excited about our ideas. COVID has created many unexpected challenges, but I have some good news too. In the past year alone, we've reached tens of thousands of students in the classroom and millions online. We do that through videos, webinars, articles, and social media. If you want to find out more, please go to fee.org.
Okay, this is our final FreedomFest emergency edition, emergency session, breakout session, and we are going to be talking about practical solutions for a free America. That seems like the right way to end this 2-hour discussion. We've got a couple great guests. I'm going to start with the one guy who's been on the Rubin Report before, Matt Kibbe. Usually when we talk about freedom, we somehow bring it back to Star Wars. Do you want to give me a Star Wars reference right up top?
Honestly, I feel like the pandemic industrial complex is the new Death Star, and they're exploiting our fears in order to concentrate power. And at some point, Palpatine is going to bring it down on us and destroy everything that's beautiful about America, unless the American people fight back. And I think that the entire government reaction to the pandemic, particularly the lockdowns, and we watch these videos online of moms getting tased at high school football games. I think that the overstep by the government on this subject is potentially the next Tea Party, the next reawakening of people wanting their liberties back and wanting more autonomy over their personal lives, and realizing that our overlords in the health industrial complex, in the pandemic industrial complex, they don't know nearly as much as they claim to.
Kibbe, I knew you could give me a Star Wars reference and a well thought out philosophical point. I thought you might say that there was a great moment last night where Joe Biden said I am the Democratic Party, which really had a little bit of Palpatine, I am the Senate. Mark, can you introduce our other panelists?
I will, but I thought, didn't Joe Biden say I am Darth Vader?
That's the next step.
That's the next step. Once he becomes president, I guess. So our other guests are David Friedman, who is a legal authority and an economist at Santa Clara University in California. He is ensconced in his library, it appears. David, we're glad to have you here. And we have also Magatte Wade, who is from Austin, Texas, and she is with the Atlas Network and is the director of the Center for African Prosperity. So that's a very optimistic title. I like that a lot. And so let me ask a question to David first. David, you're a legal scholar. How can the government get away with abridging our freedom to peaceful assemble, to freedom of religion, freedom of speech? It seems like all of these have been abridged with these executive orders. What authority do they have to legitimately do this?
If you mean legally, I suppose the ultimate answer is the fact that most of the courts will back them. We've had at least one case so far of a judge who, I think in Pennsylvania, found that there was no such authority, and that would depend in detail on the state constitution, I think, since it's almost all of it has been done at the state level, not at the federal level. Beyond that, as far as I can tell, there are sort of very wide and rather vague authorities under the usual legal rules about epidemics and contagion and so forth. We know that isolating a typhoid Mary was considered legal, and I think arguably should have been. And then it's very hard. There aren't a lot of bright lines in the world, unfortunately. And it's if you imagine for a moment that this disease were about 20 times as bad as it is, you then probably would also be in favor of saying people aren't allowed to get together and spread the disease. And I think as it as it's turned out, it's pretty clear that the reaction was a considerable overreaction. But I don't think we live in a world in which you can take a constitutional provision as a really sharp bright line that we're supposed to have the government not be involved in religion, but that really isn't possible. That the government makes decisions. Those decisions are affected by your religious beliefs. If you really believed that certain activities would result in God raining fire and brimstone down on the city, you would think it was appropriate to forbid those activities. But of course, if you don't believing that a religion is false is also a religious belief. So I think if you really look at it, the rules that we would like to think of as really sharp, bright line rules rarely are. And when things look terrible, when there's a war on or a disease, people tend to push pretty far on those fuzzy lines.
David, let me follow up with another question. Should there be any limits to executive power during an emergency? Some states, for example, say after 30 days, the executive order to continue has to receive the approval of the legislature. I believe that's the case in Utah, in Hawaii, not in Nevada, but so it depends on the state. But aren't you shocked by how much power these people have wielded? And what kind of limits can we place upon these emergency powers, even during a quarantine?
I'd have to say I am not shocked. That if you think about things that happened, say, during World War II, when a whole lot of Japanese Americans were locked up, when there was no evidence they committed any crime at all, and actually the arguments for doing it turn out to have been largely bogus. So when people get scared, things happen. That's I think you have to allow for that in the real world, unfortunately. Now, I think it makes sense to say that executive authority only overrides the ordinary rules for a very short term because the legislature can then meet. But I don't think, it's not clear to me the legislature would have made just different decisions in most states. I guess the last couple of presidents, I think, have been particularly aggressive about the idea that they want to do things and there doesn't happen to be Congress willing to go along, so they'll do them anyway. And so far, Congress has been mostly unwilling to call them on it.
Yeah.
If you think of most of the overreaction by the executive at the federal level, really is a case of Congress not stopping it. That the Congress, the Constitution is quite clear that the president can't declare war, and yet I'm trying to remember when was the last time that we actually had a real declaration of war. Maybe Korea? I'm not sure.
No, World War II.
Not even Korea.
Yeah.
So basically, Congress has taken the position, well, we're not declaring war, we're just dropping bombs on people. And the president's allowed, he's the head of the military, after all, he's allowed to drop bombs on people. So, no, anyway, I think what you really want to ask is not what should happen, but what's your best prediction of what will happen. That in general, I think one of the mistakes with a lot of political argument is that people argue about the ends that they claim to achieve rather than about the means. That somebody says, we want a government that will help the poor. And they don't ask, given the nature of government, will it in fact help the poor? Or will it buy the votes of the poor with money from people who aren't poor, the votes of the middle class with money from the poor and the rich, the votes of the rich with money from the poor and the middle class, and sort of transfer in all directions. So anyway, that would be another long story. But I think I am less optimistic perhaps than you are about the ability of a legal rule like a constitution to actually restrict governments. As you know,
I'd like to, if I can switch now to Magatte and talk to you about freedom and race. I think is a really important issue. We have all kinds of laws on the books now that prohibit discrimination. Have those laws worked, or are we entering a society in the United States, let alone Africa or anywhere else, where racism is getting worse or do you think it's getting better? And to what extent do we have a free society in terms of pursuit of happiness, pursuit of work, pursuit to live your own life the way you wish, and do it for all Americans? Oh, let's see.
I think she might be muted.
There you are.
There we go.
Yes. To answer your first question, Mark, I will go ahead and say it the way I feel it. It's, as a Black woman, I believe that there is no better time than to be alive than to 2020. Simple. If anyone wants to go back to any point in life, you know, from the racism standpoint, bring it on. I think this is the best time for any Black person to be alive from that standpoint. Now, if you want to talk about pre-slavery Africa, that's a whole nother thing. But even then, I would not want to have been alive then because of you know, we didn't have all the things we have today. So in any case, from the material standpoint, that's what I mean. So that's what I want to put out first. And then when it comes to race, racism, freedom, where do we go forward? What's ahead? I am actually very, very optimistic about the future. I feel that this crisis brought in by COVID and the lockdowns, and then even with the disastrous and the death of George Floyd, that's what I'm talking about here, the death of George Floyd. The aftermath of all of that and Black Lives Matter coming to the front, you know, I passionately believe in the ideas of Black Lives, in the three words, Black Lives Matter. Those three words together, passionately as a Black person, believe in what those words mean. But I absolutely have no sympathy with the organization itself and what they stand for. Anywhere from their rejection of, you know, this idea that a child needs a family, you know, to do better in life. And also, quite frankly, I'm quite put off by their Marxist ideas and the anti-capitalist ideas. So the reason why I think there is something interesting here that's been happening, though, is for the longest time, a lot of Black people in America have just been like, yeah, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Of course. They don't dissociate the organization with what these three words mean. But today, now that it has come so much to the front, everybody started looking more. And do you know how many of my Black friends I have here in America that tell me, you know, I really don't identify with Black Lives Matter, the organization. They're starting to go deeper and they're starting to see these elements. And I am also starting to see friends standing up stronger and more for, no, it is important for a child to be born in a two-parent household. So I'm seeing a lot of conversations that are happening now and a lot of questionings that are happening now that I did not see happen before. And I think those are great questionings. So I'm very optimistic from that standpoint. And another thing has to do with when you look at the equation, the success equation, you know, finish high school first, yet we know that 60% of Black male will not finish high school. Then make sure that you get a job, full-time job next. And then if you're going to have children, try to bring them in a two people's household if you're going to have children. Well, what I'm seeing is that even there, when you look at the education, on the education side, finish high school. Well, a lot of Black people now are finding some type of liberation with the fact that, you know, school doesn't happen directly. People cannot, they close the schools. So now folks have to go over and teach their children from home. It is hard for many people for different reasons, and this is a debate for another day. But what I am seeing here is that a lot of Black parents are actually making finally a distinction. A lot of them are starting to look at what it is that their kids were learning or not learning. So there too, I do think that the free choice movement has amazing, really great days ahead of itself. So talking about freedom, you know, school choice is really going to be big going forward. So I'm very excited about that, and especially as to what it means for this very bad, percentage that we have of Black people supposedly who are not going to finish high school. So I believe that with school choice, more of these Black boys are going to get to finish high school, which is going to work for them in the long term. And last but not least, conversations that I have also seen happen because of this violence and the riots and everything is actually now people being willing to put on the table this conversation that needs to happen, which is what I call Black culture matters, okay? If you want to have, to thrive in a society, culture really does matter. Culture does matter. And there are universal traits of character that will allow you to do well, no matter who you are, no matter what skin color you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter who you are. So those conversations are now coming to the table. And as I'm speaking to you, I have a show called, we call it Catch the Drip. So Catch the Drip is basically a show where we invite in the rappers, the hip hop artists, the people who have given the Black urban culture a very, very bad name so far. And we're giving them a chance for redemption, where they actually get to talk about the very strong traits of characters that everybody should have if you're going to make it from point A to point B. And the last one is going to be a podcast called Black Culture Matters, where we go deep on these issues. Anyone else would bring up these issues, they would be called racist, anything, we bring it on. And we're going to talk about the need we need to kill the senseless violence that's happening in the Black urban communities, and someone has to talk about it, and we're going there. And these conversations, it's never been a better time to have them than now. So from so many standpoints, life threw lemons at us with COVID and everything that has ensued, but I guarantee you that many Black people are working behind the scene right now, and we're gonna make the best lemonade out of this. So I'm very, very optimistic.
All right, a little optimism. That was by far the most optimism that we've gotten in these 2 hours. So I like seeing that silver lining. I want to stick with the race thing for just a minute, because you gave a couple interesting offshoots there that we could jump to. Matt, I'll throw this one to you. But it seems to me that a lot of people seem to think that the government is supposed to solve racism, when in many cases, we've actually gotten racism out of the equation already. But even if you watched the debate last night, Biden actually called Trump racist, and they got into that stuff about critical race theory and 1619 Project and everything else. But what underlies that is somehow that the government is supposed to be the entity that will deal with this sort of innately human problem. Is that just like the complete wrong framing of this?
Well, it's laughable, because if you look at the murder of George Floyd, and I would add the decision that just came down about Breonna Taylor, these are teachable moments about all the things that government abuse of power has wrought on the Black community, starting with the drug war, but starting with, I think there is a disparate outcome when it comes to the enforcement of laws, and a lot of it has to do with the drug war, which itself has very racist roots. So I think it's a teachable moment where a lot of people that are looking for government to solve problems like racism, guess what, guys? They created the problem in the first place. And by the way, they love pitting us against each other. They love dividing us. They love using it as a wedge issue to win the next election. And I think, again, just like the mom getting tased at her son's football game sort of woke up to conservatives about what happens when government goes too far, I think Breonna Taylor is a cautionary lesson about what happens when you give government too much power. They abuse it. They always abuse it. And the only way to take it back is through peaceful grassroots mobilization. The violence actually helps the bad guys.
So I see we have just added Stephen Hicks has joined us. Thank you for coming. And Stephen is with a senior fellow at the Atlas Society. Professor Hicks, since you're in the education field and writing and so forth, we're talking about racism. The narrative now is to teach in all the schools that racism is inherent, that you can't get away from it, that it's never going away. What's been your experience with minority students that you teach? Are we able to have a consensus as all Americans, or are we now divided?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to sign on with Magatte. I'm actually short-term pessimist. I think we have a generational problem, but I'm a medium-term optimist because I think we will get past this cultural moment, and there are a lot of signs that we're going to do. I do think we do have a racism problem. I think it's overblown and oversold. And the roots of it are not primarily political, but I think they are cultural and cognitive. What we have, unfortunately, is a whole generation of people who are underschooled, undereducated, and racism is a defense mechanism for those who adopt it against what they see as a world that is too difficult and too complicated for them to understand. If you're smart, if you know your stuff, if you can rely on your own individual judgment to take on the world, to make your business and family life and so forth a go, then you will be oriented toward independence and self-responsibility. But if you are, by the time you approach adulthood, in your honest self-assessment, aware that the world is difficult, that you don't have good math skills, you don't have good social cultural skills, you don't understand the way the world works. We're living in this very complicated scientific and technological society. It is overwhelming. And I do see not just minority students, but it's broader than that, an increasing number of freshman students who come in and they are not cognitively able to handle the world. So the point then is going to be psychologically, if you don't think you can take on the world independently and make a go of it. And this is the distressing thing for those of us who are fierce in our love of liberty and self-responsibility, to realize how many people then are looking for someone to look after them in some sense. And it doesn't necessarily mean an overtly authoritarian big daddy either in the sky or in government, but they are looking for social networks that they can join in that they think will look after them. So family is a kind of social unit, and people will give up a lot of freedom and autonomy to belong to the family if they have this psychological sense that it's going to look after them. Ethnic groups and racial groups are another easy source for people to latch onto. So I don't think that people are innately racist. I don't think that, I don't know, governments do some disincentivizing things for people in the wrong direction. We do have overt ideological racists who've been doing a lot of indoctrination, but in my judgment, the main issue is a cognitive deficiency that leads people to seek safety in a group, and racial groups are a prominent group in which they can get a sense of identity.
Stephen, I have to say you're echoing my old friend Jordan Peterson, a message that he talked about a lot, which was clean your room first. And we have too many people that think they have to clean the world first and deal with all the world's issues first. But if they could actually just deal with some of their own issues first, that then you can build the world forward, where these days we seem to think that everything should come top down when in effect it should be bottom up.
Yeah.
No,
I think that point is orthogonal to the point I'm making, but directly complementary. If you have a certain sense of vacuum in your own life, then another way you can try to think, I'm going to find some meaning in my life instead of putting together a meaningful life for myself, is just put everything out onto the world. I become a world savior, and that gives me a sense of esteem.
So I'd like to ask a question. I'm a sports fan, and I don't know if you love sports. I'm a big NBA basketball fan and college sports and so forth. Well, now every NBA game has a big banner right on the floor that says Black Lives Matter. Am I going to have to suffer through every time I watch a sporting event? Is it going to be political from now on, or can I just sit and enjoy the game?
Do you want any one of us in particular to take that up? You're asking.
I'm just wondering if we have any sports fans. I can't stand to watch the NBA games anymore. Not that I have any problem with race issues and stuff like that. It's just that sports, entertainment, there's a lot of areas. If I go to a concert to hear a rock and roll band, just keep your politics to yourself. I just want to hear the boss sing or Paul McCartney. I don't want to hear political commentary. Is that
Mark? You may note that I have a NBA basketball that was actually used in a practice right above me on the. I don't know if it's fully in the frame here, but I did not watch 1 minute of. I have not watched 1 minute of the NBA this season because I don't like the messaging. But I think the question is actually, let's throw it to Magatte, because you made the point. The difference between Black Lives Matter, the idea that all black people's lives matter, which of course any rational person agrees with, versus the organization Black Lives Matter. And it seems that the NBA is in effect endorsing the organization when they put their messaging on the court.
It seems to me that there are several things happening.
Let's go to Magatte.
Sorry. Yes. No, I think they're making a big mistake. I think, again, I passionately stand behind the meaning of the three words, Black Lives Matter, of course. That being said, if you put your weight behind the organization, I think it's a terrible mistake that they're making. Time will correct that mistake, because this is where actually I love the power of the free markets to solve and correct the situation, and it will correct itself. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I wanted to say real quick is to go back to something that Stephen, you were saying earlier, and Dave, you were talking about Jordan Peterson and his, clean your own room first. I think that maybe the reason why for Jordan Peterson it has resonated with so many people, and I think actually his audience maybe has more white people than not. I don't know, don't quote me on that. But I can tell you that based on my work now with African Americans in this country, I discovered something that has been missing with the message, clean your own room first, and this message of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Where we lose folks in terms of, for this message of self-agency is because really, so many of us have no beginning of an understanding of the threshold at which some folks are starting. When I interview some rappers and they tell you that they were born, and this woman, it could have been me, when she tells you that she was born to two parents and their claim to fame in the neighborhood was that they were the best drug dealers in the neighborhood, and they started selling drugs so that they could make it economically speaking, because that's maybe the only opportunity they saw. We can sit here and judge those parents all we want, any day, anytime. But now I'm looking at that little girl. Her name is Freedinity, and she's now grown, of course. Her dad committed suicide when she was 5. Her mom started using the doorbell at 7. I think that not enough of us put ourselves in the shoes of someone like that when we try to say, no matter what happened to you, you're responsible for what you do for you. And then I would like for us to add, and we will help you with it, starting where you are. So I think that our message, whether it's Thomas Sowell, Glenn Laurie, all of these folks that I absolutely adore and respect on our side of the spectrum, who say all the things that they say, it just comes across too much as you should, you must, you ought, you have, and blah, blah, blah. Yes, we know the data, we know everything. But can we also start mixing to that what someone like Bishop Omar, based in Dallas, is doing with the OGU movement, his OGU movement, where we're saying, okay, we understand exactly where you're coming from, and we know where you should go. We're going to walk with you. So you come from this environment, we're going to bring with us people who know your background, and we're going to take you to the other side from there. So I do think that our side, with this whole self-agency message, it's a wonderful message, but the reason why it's falling flat on the ears of those who should pay attention to this is because we kind of missed the last mile of bridging to them. And I think that mile is crucial. It's critical. But if we take it, we win. We win because Black people will finally achieve prosperity. And with that prosperity, they're going to get the respect that they deserve. And from there, watch all of this poof, 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 and poof. So that's what I'm seeing.
Magatte, this is me officially inviting you to come on my show to talk about just that so that we can get these ideas out there. How about that?
I know David had a comment and follow up, David, do laws against discrimination have any unintended consequences?
Obviously they do. If you know that it's hard to fire Blacks, you're going to be reluctant to hire them. That would be the most obvious example. But I think more generally that one of the reasons for racial problems is the shift of more and more activities into the political sphere. That the market is usually a situation where individuals' interests are compatible, where if you are good at doing something and I need somebody who's good at doing that, I want to hire you to do it, you want to be hired to do it. In the political system, you're much more nearly playing in a zero-sum game, where what I want to do is to make up a coalition of people like me in order to make sure that we get more of the pie, which means that you get less of the pie. So I think in that sense, making the world more political has a negative effect in terms of racial and other kinds of group conflicts, because it creates a world where what you want is a coalition that will result in your winning, whereas the market most of the time is not in that situation. But the other thing that struck me about the earlier comment about the Black Lives Matter thing in the basketball court is that a bunch of different things are happening at once, which is usually the case in the world. One of them is a fundamentalist religion, which you can think of roughly as wokeism, which, like a lot of other fundamentalist religions, results in some people being very, very enthusiastic and being willing to push very hard for what they think is holy and right and so forth. And people who both don't want to fight them and have no very strong views on the subject are naturally inclined to go along. So I think if you look at say, the status of Christianity in much of US history, there were an awful lot of people who, for public purposes, were Christians and said Christian things, didn't actually believe in it, but there were enough people who did believe in it, so it was sensible to pretend to be that. I mean, I was struck by this whole, quite a while back, there was talk about whether Obama was a Muslim, and it was clear he wasn't a Muslim because Muslims have to pray a certain number of times a day, and it would have been pretty obvious. My question is he a Christian? I know he said he's a Christian. It could be he's a Christian. But given the political environment, it was in the interest of almost any politician to claim to agree with the majority religion because he didn't want to lose voters. I don't know whether any, I would say of the last bunch of presidents, probably a majority of them, I have no way of knowing if they actually believed in the religion they claimed to believe in. So I think it's worth thinking about the world in those terms and how people act. And I suspect that at the moment, if you don't go along with the more or less woke sort of shibboleths, as it were, it's costly to you. You'll get people protesting against you and such. If you do, it doesn't cost you anything. My guess is that, like other fundamentalist religions, the furor will die down, but unfortunately it may take a while because these things, if you think about Islam, I would say it lasted for 50 or 100 years, during which people were really enthusiastic about it and then started sliding downhill with occasional revivals at various points. And I think that's been true historically of Christianity as well, that the number of people who really believe in any religion is not nearly as high as it appears to be, but the number of people who sort of, well, I suppose I believe in it. And I think that's going to be true of wokeism as well. And to what extent pushing too hard is going to cause a reaction, I'm not quite sure, because you've certainly had noticeable amount of people objecting to various things happening associated with sort of generally progressive ideology seen as a religion. But anyway,
perhaps by divine intervention, we ran out of time just as we introduced religion into the equation. I don't know how that worked, but here we are. Thank you guys for joining us on this panel, and I think people will hopefully feel a little more hopeful.
Thank you.
All right, a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.